Hi guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So recently, a PSA 9 graded Pokemon Pikachu Illustrator Card from 1998 sold through Weiss Auctions out of Long Island, New York for $195,000. This is a record price to be paid for this particular item, with the most recent sale that was pretty much a record-breaking price set back in 2016 when Scott Pratt consigned his copy of a similar card in the same condition to Heritage Auctions, which sold for roughly $55,000. So I've been fielding a lot of comments and questions in my personal email about what my thoughts are on this particular item and also the strength of the Pokemon collecting marketplace overall. So I wanted to give my feedback on this sale and why this card sold for so much. So before we begin, I have to remind my audience that, again, the three most speculative markets in the greater collectibles trade at present time are the market for graded vintage video games and even raw video games as well from the coveted vintage Nintendo era is astounding right now. That market's on fire. The second speculative market you got to worry about is what's happening in the graded and vintage Magic the Gathering marketplace. This is why I tell you guys, you are probably better off buying vintage, authentic, factory seal booster boxes than graded cards at present time. Just my opinion. The third market that we got to talk about is, of course, Pokemon. Vintage Pokemon products and graded cards are very hot in today's marketplace. So, for some of you, my answer to this sale is probably going to surprise some of my audience. Not all, but some of you guys are really going to relate to where I'm going with this. When we look at something like a Pikachu Illustrator card, you have to understand that there are less, and again, I know I'm not stating an exact number, but I believe that there's less than 40 out there known. These were given away as part of an illustration contest back in the late 1980s for Pokemon when it really first premiered on the scene, at least in North America. So North America was fairly new to the Pokemon phenomenon at this particular time. That said, it was very popular. Pokemon was in a speculative bubble right out of the gate. The problem is, as I've said in another video, Wizards of the Coast kind of dropped the ball, because Wizards of the Coast was also mass-producing Magic the Gathering at the time, which was building a steady base at this particular time frame, while Pokemon was fairly new. So people wanted the Pokemon cards, but they couldn't get them. This is why today, first edition base Pokemon cards and even Shadowless cards sell for a significant premium on the secondary market, depending on condition. So where am I going with this? Well, you have to understand that the Pokemon Pikachu Illustrator card would be comparable to, almost comparable, to a gold Nintendo World Championships cartridge from that same coveted era and or time span. So what do I mean by that? It's a holy grail collectible. We are talking about the top 1% of the market when we talk about the Pokemon Pikachu Illustrator card. So it does not surprise me that an item with this known rarity to boot sold for $195,000. That does not mean I'm telling you to go out and quote-unquote invest in this card. Remember, guys, if for somebody to buy one collectible that's at $195,000, they probably have a net worth of $5 million or more on average. Are there exceptions to that rule? Absolutely. I've worked with collectors, investors, and dealers, I'm not going to say any names, who have come to me and they have a net worth of $500,000 or $1 million, and they want to spend $100,000 on one item, which I caution against. That is completely stupid to tie up 10 to 20% of your entire net worth in one item. That's ridiculous. I don't recommend that. However, the people playing in the high tier market, usually the top 1% of the collecting market as a whole, generally have the money and the means to do so. They are not mortgaging their houses. They are not taking cash out of 401ks or investment accounts. They are not letting their household and or family responsibilities suffer. So when you're at that level of the market, it makes complete sense for me that if you wanted to go after something that is considered a holy grail, a trophy item, or something extremely rare, and you have the means, by all means, go after it. No harm, no foul. But just understand, there's going to come a time where even items like that fail to continually, exponentially go up in value. For instance, let's just use this as a scenario. Let's say someone pays $195,000 for that card. A couple of years go by, they put that card back on the market. The next one sells for $250,000. Well now, okay, they made some money on that card, right? They made roughly $55,000. Obviously, they have to pay the auction house a commission. They have to account for opportunity cost of tying up that money in that particular collectible. They also have to take into account what they could have made in the stock market on average, and well as the cost of inflation. However, that's still a significant amount to be made, so if somebody holds that card for 3 years and it sells again for $250,000, they did okay. But this is what you also have to think in the back of your mind. What happens now if that card is valued at $250,000, someone buys it, they go to flip it 3 years out, and it only sells for $225,000 on the market at that time? Well, now they just lost $25,000 of their principal. Plus, they have to still pay an auction house out of that. Plus, you have to factor in the cost of inflation, the opportunity costs, and how much you could have made just by putting $250,000 in the Creator stock market as a whole and not doing anything, not having to store a collectible or anything at all, anywhere. Your hands are clean. You see what I'm saying? So my caution to a lot of people is, number one, be very careful that you're not getting caught up into the trend where, well, gee, this card once sold for $55,000, now it sells for $195,000. Well, that means in another 3 years, it's going to be worth $250,000, $300,000, $500,000. That's a fallacy. Could it happen? Yes, that can happen. Items have done that before where they've steadily increased. But here's the kicker. No asset goes up in value exponentially for the long term. So, that's a lesson to learn from this particular sale. Another lesson, and this is probably the most important lesson of all, a lot of you guys are going to use this particular sale to justify to your wives, to your girlfriends, to yourselves, to go out and spend massive amounts of money on vintage Pokemon products. Here's the problem with that. If you've watched any of my other videos, I've said this many times, you cannot compare the low end and the mid tiers of any collecting category to what's happening in the top 1 to 3% of the market. It doesn't happen, guys. So you cannot sit here and go out and buy a first edition factory seal booster box of, say, Jungle or Fossil and claim that you're doing it because the market for Pokemon products is strong because a rare Pikachu Illustrator Card in PSA 9 just sold for $195,000. The markets are not comparable. They're not even in the same ballpark, let alone the same stadium. It's completely two different market dynamics that are governing those particular prices being paid on the secondary market. Chances are the person who paid $195,000 for that card is not even buying first edition factory seal booster boxes from Jungle or Fossil or Team Rocket. He's looking at the top 1 to 3% of every collecting market that he's involved in, and he's going after the trophy pieces. So the idea or the fallacy that because someone's paying a record price for an item in a market that you're also collecting, and that's going to have an impact on that market as a whole, is false. It will attract speculators to the market. For instance, I've noticed this. I collect coins and currency. I invest in coins and currency. One of the things that always scares me is when an auction house announces that a coin sold for $1 million or $2 million. There are people out there, the general public, who don't even really collect on average. They will think about entering the coin collecting marketplace because they think if they spend $500 or $1,000 on a coin, well, if certain coins are already achieving $1 million or $2 million on the market, maybe in a couple of years, that $500 or $1,000 coin will be $10,000 or $20,000. It doesn't work that way, guys. A low-end item usually remains a low-end item. A mid-tier item usually remains a mid-tier item. That's why when we invest in antiques and collectibles, you have to go after, and I did a video on this, the investment grade items. The top 10 to 15% of the market if you want to invest. That doesn't mean all those items are going to go up in value across the board. If you really want to invest, go after the top 1 to 3%. But understand, you have to have the money and means to play in that market. Most people involved in a lot of these collecting categories, or those that come to me for advice, do not have the means to enter those markets. You can't come to me and go, hey, Sean, I want to buy an Alpha Edition Black Lotus in BGS 9, 9.5, because this is how the conversation's going to go. That's great. How much do you think you're going to pay for it? Well, I'm willing to pay up to $120,000 for that card. And this is me. Wonderful. Where are you getting the money from? What's your net worth? How much expenses do you have? And then the person tells me, well, I have a net worth of $500,000. I'm sorry. You cannot realistically tie up $100,000+ in one item if you only have a net worth of $500,000. Now, before you shit on me in this video, I understand that a lot of you out there would love to have a net worth of $500,000. Well, you got to understand, everything is in perspective to how a person with $500,000 views certain items. Just like if you're going to your job, you make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, and maybe you have a net worth of $100,000, and you're thankful for that, but you're looking to grow it. If you have a net worth of $100,000 and you come to me and you tell me you want to lock up $10,000 in one collectible, I'm going to say to you, that's insane. You got to take a step back. You got to start analyzing things from the broader perspective. You have to have a plan in place so you know what you're buying, what the long-term or short-term potential of that item is, and when you want to divest, meaning sell off that item at some point in time, what you expect to get for the item in question. You cannot hold some of this stuff indefinitely. It is ridiculous when I hear people tell me that their goal is to buy a copy of Action Comics 1 and they want to hold it forever and pass it down to generation. I'm going to tell you right now, 3 generations down the line, they're not going to even care about Superman anymore. I would even argue 2 generations down the line, they're not going to care about Superman anymore. So be very careful what you put your money into. Understand how markets work. And also have a long-term and short-term plan for your holdings. That's all I got on this, guys. Thank you so much for listening to me. And thank you for subscribing. Have a great night.